The first time I saw Earth, the chamber was filled with laughter. It rolled across the vaulted ceiling of the Galactic Council like static, amused, dismissive, bored. I stood among my kind on the observation tier of the Zoltor Ascendancy, gazing at the holographic projection of a small blue world rotating slowly in artificial starlight. Clouds choked its skies, oceans swallowed most of its surface. Its tectonic plates never rested. Even from orbit, it looked unstable. A death world, someone scoffed behind me. I agreed then. How could I not? Earth's atmosphere was thick with corrosive oxygen. Its storms tore continents apart with casual violence. Its biosphere devoured itself endlessly, life evolving only to be hunted, consumed, erased. There was no harmony, no refinement, no elegance. Compared to the engineered ecosystems of the Ascendancy, Earth looked like a failed experiment that refused to end. And then there were the humans. We magnified the image, isolating their cities, their movement patterns, their bodies. Soft, exposed, fragile. No natural armor, no claws, no venom, no psychic shielding. Their senses were laughably narrow, their lifespans short, their societies fractured by ideology and borders they themselves had imagined. They survived by accident, one of the councillors declared. The predators of Earth interested us far more. Sharks that never slept, felines that killed with silence and precision, bears that absorbed damage that would shatter armored infantry. These were creatures worthy of study. Primitive, yes, but honest in their violence. We cataloged them carefully, assigning threat metrics and behavioral models. Humans, by contrast, were background noise. The proposal came as entertainment. Project Menagerie, a controlled incursion, engineered hunters released into Earth's ecosystems to demonstrate, before the full council and its observers, just how insignificant an unshielded pre-FTL world truly was. The goal was not conquest, it was spectacle. Data would be harvested, footage archived, lessons reinforced. The galaxy would be reminded why ascension mattered, and why some species were never meant to leave their gravity wells. When Earth's designation appeared on the central display, the laughter intensified. No planetary defense grid, an analyst noted. No unified command, another added. They still debate governance through ritualized conflict, someone said, almost fondly. I remember watching the planet rotate and feeling nothing. No anticipation, no concern, just a detached curiosity, the way one might observe microbial life under a lens. The plan was simple, elegant, irrefutable. Release limited threats, observe collapse, withdraw. What none of us questioned, what never appeared in the simulations, was the assumption underlying every projection that humans were separate from the violence of their world, that predators were something they had conquered, suppressed, or risen above, that intelligence had lifted them out of nature's brutal hierarchy. We believed evolution had softened them. I see now how absurd that was. As authorization codes were exchanged and the Menagerie assets prepared for deployment, I studied a final feed, humans in one of their urban centers. They moved through artificial canyons of metal and glass, unaware that a galactic audience had already judged them obsolete. Some laughed, some argued, some held their young close. They looked calm. That unsettled me, though I did not yet understand why. The council adjourned amid applause. Earth was approved. The demonstration would begin within cycles. As the hologram dimmed and the chamber emptied, I lingered, staring at the fading blue afterimage. For the first time, a thought crept into my mind. Quiet, unwelcome, easily dismissed. If this world was truly as weak as we believed, why had it survived itself for so long? I turned away before the question could take root. Behind me, the launch countdown for Project Menagerie began. And far below, on a planet we thought already defeated, humanity went on living,
unaware that it was about to be tested not as a civilization, but as a species. The first kills were supposed to be effortless. That was how the simulations described them. Clean arcs of probability collapsing into certainty. Our engineered hunters descended into Earth's biomes like perfected equations given flesh. Each organism had been refined through millennia of selective annihilation, stripped of inefficiency, fear, and hesitation. Muscle fibers denser than steel, reflexes tuned beyond natural limits, sensory organs that map heat, vibration, and electromagnetic signatures simultaneously. Against such designs, Earth's wildlife should have shattered. The council chambers filled once more, this time with anticipation rather than laughter. Live feeds bloomed across the displays. Dense forests, frozen tundra, open savannas, abyssal oceans.
Our constructs entered silently, their presence rippling through local ecosystems like a pressure change before a storm. At first, everything proceeded as expected. An apex hunter encountered a terrestrial predator. Engagement followed, local life terminated within seconds. Analysts nodded, threat metrics updated, confidence held. Then the data streams began to misalign. In the northern forests, wolf packs did not scatter as projected. They retreated, regrouped, and returned. Not in disarray, but formation. They tested the construct's perimeter with feints, probing its reactions before committing. Within days, their hunting patterns shifted. They stopped attacking alone. They used terrain. They learned when not to strike. On the savannas, the big cats did something even more troubling. They watched. Our constructs moved through tall grass like gods of violence, yet the lions did not rush them. They altered their routes, avoiding confrontation while shadowing at a distance. Cubs were relocated. Kills were dragged into denser cover. One feed showed a lioness abandoning a hunt mid-charge, not in fear, but calculation. Instinctual variance, an analyst muttered. I said nothing, though unease crept along my neural ridges. In the oceans, the anomaly deepened. Great white sharks, creatures we had dismissed as primitive, circled our aquatic constructs without engaging. They maintained distance, adjusting depth and angle, testing response times. One feed showed a shark making a deliberate pass close enough to trigger defensive systems, then retreating untouched. It was not fleeing, it was studying. Confusion spread through the observation tiers, models recalculated, parameters adjusted. The hunters continued their advance, but the elegance was gone. Earth was not reacting like a helpless ecosystem. It was responding like a living system under threat. And then the humans entered the frame. At first, they were peripheral, small figures at the edge of drone feeds, vehicles stopping along forest roads, boats idling at a distance, individuals watching through optical devices, their heart rates spiking in patterns our translators flagged as concern, not terror. They should have run. Instead, they followed. Humans tracked our constructs with crude tools, satellites that rely on reflected light, ground sensors that listen for vibrations. They communicated constantly, data flashing across their networks in uncontrolled torrents, images, coordinates, warnings. Adaptations. When one of our hunters crippled a wolf, humans intervened. I watched the feed 3 times to confirm what I was seeing. A human approached the wounded animal, despite the lingering presence of our construct. Another human stood guard, weapon raised, not at the wolf, but outward, scanning for movement. They evacuated the animal under fire, smoke and sound masking their retreat, a counselor demanded. But it wasn't irrelevant to them. When a menagerie unit killed a pride leader on the savannah, we expected chaos. Instead, humans appeared within hours. They drove the remaining lions away from the kill zone, marked the area, and began placing devices. Simple, mechanical traps designed not for our constructs, but for understanding their movement. They were mapping us. Losses mounted, not catastrophic, but noticeable. Our hunters began encountering resistance that did not fit any projected response curve. Traps detonated early, lures failed, ambush points were avoided before engagement. The humans were learning. What disturbed me most was the speed. Farmers shared footage with soldiers. Soldiers consulted scientists. Scientists modified civilian tools into weapons and sensors. There was no hierarchy delay, no ritualized authorization. Roles blurred, overlapped, dissolved entirely. Anyone who learned something shared it. Anyone who failed documented why. Where other species screamed, humans adapted. Where others prayed, humans prepared. The council ordered increased pressure. Additional constructs were deployed. Engagement parameters loosened. Collateral damage allowances expanded.
Test them directly, a commander insisted. I felt something tightened within me then, a sensation my species rarely experiences. Our cognition is optimized for certainty, for prediction, for control. This was none of those things. I reviewed the data alone, isolating human behavior patterns. Stress markers rose, but panic never reached dominance. Instead, there was focus, resolve, a grim acceptance that whatever had arrived on their world was not leaving peacefully. One line from a human transmission repeated across several feeds, translated imperfectly but clearly enough. If it bleeds, we can learn how to stop it. That was when doubt became unavoidable. If these were their preparations, if this was how they responded to what they believed were animals, what would happen when they realized they were facing an intelligence that had already underestimated them?
The Council authorized full escalation. Humanity was no longer an observer variable. They were the next phase of the trial. As the order propagated through the ascendancy systems, I watched a final feed, a group of humans standing at the edge of a forest at dusk, weapons lowered, eyes fixed on the tree line, where one of our hunters had vanished. They were not afraid of what was out there. They were waiting. We had been wrong about the predators. That realization came quietly, without spectacle, buried beneath layers of incoming data and revised threat assessments. Earth's apex creatures were not the anomaly. They were the clue we had failed to interpret. The true revelation was not in tooth or claw, but in the beings who walked upright among them. Humans had never escaped their predators. They had become them. As menagerie operations expanded, we anticipated mass evacuations, population collapse, the familiar pattern of a species retreating from inevitable annihilation. Instead, Earth's cities did something profoundly unexpected. They hardened. Urban centers transformed almost overnight. Streets were torn open, repurposed into trenches and barriers. Buildings shed reflective surfaces and gained matte camouflage that confused our optics. Power grids decentralized. Communication hubs multiplied instead of centralizing, spreading like neural clusters rather than command nodes. There were no energy shields, no orbital defense platforms, just layers, redundancy, preparation. It was the architecture of a species that had fought wars not for dominance, but for survival, over and over again, against famine, against disease, against each other. Humans did not need instruction manuals for extinction scenarios. They carried them in cultural memory. Our scanners detected a surge in subterranean activity, bunkers, tunnels, fallback routes, not shelters of desperation, but of continuity, places designed to keep fighting even after loss. And the traps. I watched our constructs advance through a ruined industrial zone, their threat matrices clear. Then the ground collapsed. Mechanical restraints snapped shut, reinforced with materials scavenged from civilian infrastructure. When one construct adapted, altering its movement pattern, the next trap triggered earlier, adjusted, recalibrated. These are not random, an analyst whispered. They weren't. They were iterative. What unsettled me most was not the ingenuity, it was the calm. Human transmissions revealed no ritualistic glorification of violence, no songs of conquest, no declarations of supremacy. They spoke of casualties with subdued voices, cataloging losses, acknowledging grief without allowing it to dominate decision-making. Violence, to them, was not sacred. It was necessary. They endured it the way other species endured gravity or radiation, as an environmental constant, something to be mitigated, survived, and, if possible, ended on their terms. Generations of conflict had carved instincts into them that our scanners could not detect. Pattern recognition born from chaos, a tolerance for sustained threat that bordered on the unnatural. Where other species fractured under prolonged pressure, humans stabilized. Their stress responses plateaued. Fear sharpened instead of consuming them. I observed one moment, one impossible contradiction that shattered the last of my assumptions. A human stood beside a wounded terrestrial animal, hands stained with blood not their own. Their heart rate was elevated but controlled. They applied pressure, bound tissue, whispered sounds our translators marked as soothing. Behind them, concealed among shattered concrete, an ambush lay prepared.
When our construct entered the kill zone, the human did not hesitate. Mercy and brutality existed in perfect equilibrium. The construct fell in less than 30 seconds. I replayed the footage repeatedly, searching for hesitation, emotional instability, anything that would make sense of it. There was none. The human did not revel in the kill, they did not recoil from it either. Once the threat was neutralized, they returned to the wounded animal, resuming care as if no line had been crossed. This contradiction should not have been possible. In the council chambers, the atmosphere shifted. Laughter vanished. Conversations grew sharp, clipped, urgent. Commanders demanded projections that no longer converged. Every simulation branched into uncertainty. The phrase acceptable loss appeared with increasing frequency. Authorization codes escalated, restrictions lifted. The menagerie was no longer constrained by demonstration protocols. We deployed unrestricted assets, hunters designed not to test ecosystems, but to erase resistance. I submitted my report during this transition. Humans do not flee extinction scenarios, I wrote. They settle into them. They adapt their societies, their psychology, and their morality around the expectation of loss. I emphasize the implications, a species that accepts violence without worshiping it.
That prepares for the worst without surrendering empathy, that integrates predators into its identity rather than denying them. The report was acknowledged, then ignored. Escalation was approved unanimously. As the first unrestricted constructs made planetfall, I monitored human responses across multiple regions. Annihilation. It was simply the first time the threat came from the stars. One transmission, intercepted and translated, spread rapidly across their networks. Not a command, not a plea, a statement. We have been here before. I felt a chill ripple through my cognition. Because they were right. Earth had always been a battlefield. Against nature, against itself, against the slow certainty of extinction that haunted every living thing on that planet, and humanity had not only survived that truth, they had learned how to live with it. As our war forms advanced toward their first major urban engagement, I found myself watching less as an observer and more as a witness to a species revealing what it truly was when stripped of illusions. The Council believed escalation would break them. I began to suspect it would do the opposite. The phrase apex predator lost all meaning the day humanity went to war. In our databases, the term belonged to Earth's beasts, lions, sharks, bears, creatures ruled by instinct and physical dominance. Humans had never qualified. They were cataloged as fragile generalists, dependent on tools and circumstance. Survivors, yes, but not hunters in the truest sense. That classification collapsed within a single planetary rotation. When escalation was approved, humanity did not announce it. There was no broadcast of defiance, no ritual declaration of unity. The transformation was quieter and far more terrifying. Civilians vanished, not in panic, not as refugees flooding roads and skies, but into structures that had clearly existed long before our arrival. Resistance networks activated with precision that suggested rehearsal. Urban populations thinned, not chaotically, but selectively. Those unable to fight removed, those who could repositioned. Factories stopped producing consumer goods and began forging components whose purposes were not immediately clear. Supply chains reoriented overnight. Materials were scavenged, melted down, reforged. Humans did not ask whether conversion was legal or ethical. They asked whether it would work. Hunters became soldiers. Soldiers became tacticians. Scientists became architects of death. And they did it without ceremony. Our strongest war beasts made planetfall in force, designed to overwhelm through sheer presence. They were larger than anything Earth had ever produced, armored against conventional weapons, their neural cores shielded from electromagnetic disruption. We expected devastation. Instead, we observed efficiency. The first warbeast fell in a frozen wasteland far from any major settlement. Human units had lured it there deliberately, drawing it across unstable ice sheets. They attacked not its armor, but its balance. When it adapted, shifting weight distribution, they changed tactics instantly, detonating charges beneath the ice, plunging the creature into sub-zero depths its systems were never meant to endure. It did not roar when it died. It thrashed. In the jungles, another construct disappeared entirely. Recon drones found nothing at first. No wreckage, no thermal signature, only disturbed foliage and the remains of our own tracking units. Weeks later, Fragments of its armor surfaced in a river hundreds of kilometers away, stripped and repurposed into human defenses. They had not destroyed it immediately. They had studied it. Across deserts, humans used heat and mirage to blind our optics. In urban ruins, they fought vertically, above, below, within spaces too narrow for our designs to maneuver. In the oceans, they exploited pressure and sound, driving our aquatic hunters into depths where their own systems failed under forces Earth's native life accepted as normal. What horrified the Council was not the losses. It was the pattern. Humans learned our biology faster than we adapted it. They identified stress responses we did not know we possessed, auditory frequencies that disrupted coordination, visual patterns that triggered defensive freezes, fear responses buried so deep in our engineered forms that we had forgotten they existed. They weaponized our own design assumptions. One feed ended all remaining debate. A human unit advanced through a forest at dawn. Thermal imaging showed multiple heat signatures moving in loose formation. At first, analysts assumed multiple squads. Then the overlays resolved. Wolves. Living, breathing Earth predators moved beside the humans, not restrained, not coerced. They advanced in coordinated arcs, responding to subtle hand signals and shifts in posture. The humans did not command them. They trusted them. When a war beast burst from concealment, the wolves scattered, not in fear, but strategy, drawing its attention, funneling it toward a prepared kill zone. Humans struck from elevation and concealment, targeting joints already weakened by previous engagements. The war beast fell. The wolves did not attack its corpse. They withdrew, alert, disciplined. This was not dominance over nature. This was partnership. A silence fell over the council chambers as the footage ended. No one laughed. No one spoke. The realization settled slowly, heavily, like gravitational pull. Humans were not the weakest species in the galaxy. They were a species that had evolved on a world where survival required constant negotiation with death, where predators were not enemies to be erased, but forces to be understood, respected, and, when necessary, fought beside. They had survived under constant threat long enough to internalize it. And now they had weaponized that resilience. Council broadcasts shifted tone. Earth was no longer described as a test case or demonstration. New language appeared in internal briefings. Containment risk, escalation hazard, president species. Other empires began to watch. What they saw unsettled them. Humanity did not pursue total annihilation. They targeted logistics, disrupted command and control, forced retreats without overextension. They left corridors open, not out of mercy, but calculation. They fought like a species that understood the cost of victory and chose sustainability over spectacle. Losses mounted beyond acceptable thresholds. For the first time in recorded history, the Ascendancy faced a question it had never needed to answer. Do we continue, or do we leave? The vote was swift, reluctant, ununanimous. Retreat protocols activated. Our fleets disengaged from orbit. Remaining war beasts received termination codes to prevent capture. Observation platforms powered down, their feeds cutting one by one. The galaxy watched as we withdrew from a world that had not even achieved faster-than-light travel. A pre-FTL species. As our ships ascended, I accessed the final surface feeds. Humans stood on ridgelines, in forests, along coastlines. Some watched the sky through optics.
Others simply stood with naked eyes, faces unreadable. There was no cheering, no pursuit, no triumphant display of dominance. They did not chase us. They watched us leave. That, more than any battlefield loss, broke something within me. Because it meant they were not fighting for revenge. They had been fighting for survival. And now that the immediate threat was gone, they returned, already, to rebuilding, to mourning, to preparation for whatever might come next. As our jump drives charged, a final human transmission reached our sensors, not addressed to us specifically, not a threat. A statement broadcast openly into space. This world is not unguarded. The jump initiated before further translation could complete. In the void between stars, surrounded by the echoes of our own retreat, I understood the truth we would never admit publicly. We had not discovered humanity's apex predators. We had become their proof of concept. The war ended before the galaxy understood it had begun. Our fleets limped back through established lanes, hulls scarred, data cores fractured, silence hanging heavy in every command deck. Yet even at reduced capacity, our communication relays carried the truth faster than our ships ever could. Records leaked, sensor footage circulated, after-action reports, once classified, were dissected, copied, and shared across 1,000 systems. A pre-FTL world had repelled a galactic power. At first, disbelief dominated the response. Analysts accused our commanders of exaggeration. Rival empires suggested political theater. Some claimed the ascendancy had staged the conflict to justify military reform. It was easier to doubt us than to accept what the evidence implied. But the evidence accumulated. Footage of war beasts falling to kinetic weapons and environmental traps. Sensor logs showing coordinated planetary defense without orbital infrastructure. Tactical analyses highlighting something no doctrine had accounted for. A species that did not collapse when escalation failed, but adapted faster because of it. Systems that had once laughed at Earth when quiet. Strategic councils convened emergency sessions. Military doctrines, unchanged for millennia, were rewritten in weeks. Words like demonstration war and limited incursion vanished from planning documents. New classifications appeared instead. Resilient species. Boundary world. Psychological contagion risk. I attended one such council remotely, my presence tolerated rather than welcomed.
I listened as admirals debated probability curves that no longer converged, as ethicists argued whether Earth represented an anomaly or a warning. One demanded, no one answered immediately, because none of us liked the conclusion. Humanity sent no declaration of victory, no list of demands, no territorial claims, no ultimatum broadcast into the void. We monitored every known frequency, expecting triumph, outrage, or threat. What we received instead was documentation. A single transmission emerged from Earth's surface, unencrypted, undirected. It was not authored by leaders or military command. No insignia marked it, no species identifiers beyond the raw visual feed. It began with ruins. Cities fractured by orbital debris and collapsed structures, smoke drifting through streets once filled with noise. Humans moved through the wreckage methodically, clearing rubble, salvaging materials, tending to the wounded. The feed shifted. Funerals. Not grand ceremonies, but small gatherings, hands clasped, heads bowed, names spoken softly, then recorded. Loss acknowledged without spectacle. Then children. They sat beneath shattered skies while adults rebuilt around them. Lessons continued. Mathematics scratched into dust. Stories spoken aloud where data terminals had failed. Not tales of victory. Not tales of hatred. Stories of endurance. The transmission ended without commentary. No music. No narration. Just silence. Across the galaxy, something fractured. Conquest we understood. Defiance we respected. Even vengeance had a place in strategic calculus. This was something else. Humans did not seek revenge because they did not need it. They did not posture because survival had already justified itself. They had absorbed the war into their collective memory, the way they absorbed every catastrophe, by learning from it and preparing for recurrence. That terrified the galaxy more than conquest ever could. A species that demands tribute can be appeased. A species that seeks dominance can be resisted. But a species that remembers, that kind prepares long after the threat has gone quiet. I reviewed intercepted human data streams long after the Council dismissed them as irrelevant. Their networks pulsed with analysis, not of us as enemies, but as case studies. They debated environmental adaptations, biological vulnerabilities, orbital response times. They archived everything. They did not obsess over victory. They studied failure. Their own.
Theirs was not a culture of triumph, but of scars. Every loss was catalogued, every mistake preserved, not to shame, but to teach. Humans did not erase their wounds. They passed them down. I began to understand the true danger of humanity then. Not their weapons, those would change. Not their tactics, those would evolve. but their memory. They remembered predators. They remembered plagues. They remembered wars that burned their world long before we ever looked up and noticed it existed. And now, they remembered us. Some in the council argued for information suppression, for redaction, for controlled narratives that framed the retreat as strategic restraint. But it was too late. Too many systems had already seen the raw feeds. Too many minds had recalibrated their understanding of strength. Earth became a reference point. Their name entered our lexicon not as an insult, but as a measure. I watched the stars drift past the viewport of my return vessel and felt something unfamiliar settle within me. Not fear, respect. Humanity had not conquered space, yet space had already begun to change around them. Because somewhere in the galaxy's collective consciousness, a truth had taken root. Quiet, irreversible. If a species without shields could endure a galactic war, if a people who buried their dead could return to teaching their children within the same cycle, then perhaps the measure of power was not how loudly one could dominate the stars, but how long one could remember why they fought. I was the only one who stayed. When the Ascendancy fleets disengaged, retreat protocols executed, and war beasts were deactivated, my orders were clear. Depart immediately, submit post-mission analysis, and catalog all deviations for review. But I could not leave. Not yet. Something about Earth demanded more than observation from afar. It demanded understanding, not as a threat, not as prey, not as a curiosity, as a phenomenon. I remained in orbit aboard a cloaked observation platform, sensors running silently, cameras scanning every ecosystem, every human settlement, every movement. At first, the feeds were familiar. Cities repairing, factories restarting, humans moving among ruins as if choreographed by instinct. But the pattern became remarkable when I focused on the land itself. Forests regrew in areas we had scarred. Rivers, diverted and polluted, were rerouted and cleaned. Earth's predators, wolves, big cats, bears, were treated with care and attention.
Humans did not exterminate or control them outright. They rehabilitated, monitored, protected. The same humans who had fought for survival with fire and steel now worked to restore balance to the ecosystems that had shaped them. And yet, they did not disarm. Defensive perimeters remained. Observation posts stood in strategic locations. Weapons were rebuilt. Sensors recalibrated. The preparation that had once repelled my war beasts continued, not as an act of hostility, but as readiness. They had learned to thrive without giving up vigilance. Then, they noticed me. A small fleet of detection drones approached my platform. I expected alarms, defensive strikes, or immediate aggression. Instead, I was met with signals, transmissions, open questions. "What are you?" one asked, not through spoken language, but through the universal translation interface, rendered in symbols we could both parse. I responded. My answers were cautious, deliberate, explanations of observation, of past actions, of intent. And they listened. They did not attack. They did not demand surrender. They considered my presence, evaluated my words, and engaged with choice, not obedience, not fear, choice. It was then I realized something profound. Humans' greatest weapon was not claws or fire, not shields or artillery, not speed or strength. It was choice. Choice, the ability to act or not in the face of immense threat. Choice to rebuild rather than raise. Choice to protect rather than dominate. Choice to forgive yet remain vigilant. A species that could wield such freedom would survive everything else the galaxy might throw at it. I spent cycles observing, documenting. I watched humans restore a hunting ground devastated by one of our menagerie units. Wolves returned to the hills, their scars mirrored by careful tracking collars, human caretakers nearby, ensuring survival. Children learned to navigate forests alongside the predators, taught respect, timing, and caution. Schools were rebuilt even as floodwaters threatened the peripheries. Tools were made from debris, repurposed, remade. I saw grief expressed with dignity, anger contained with deliberation, adaptation executed with patience. Every action was a choice. Every choice honed survival. And finally, I understood. We had invaded. We had assumed superiority. We had believed violence, strategy, and technology alone defined supremacy in the galaxy.
But humanity had shown me another metric entirely.
Power was measured not by destruction, but by the wisdom to choose how, when, and why to use it. And as I watched the sun rise over a continent slowly healing itself, I recorded a single thought in my logs. This is why they endure. This is why they matter. This is why no weapon, no war, no empire can erase them without first understanding their choice. I returned to the council chambers, carrying evidence they did not wish to confront. Hollow screens displayed reconstructed cityscapes, wildlife returning to damaged forests, humans standing beside their predators in perfect harmony. Every feed, every report, every sensor reading screamed a truth they were unwilling to accept. Humans were not a species to be dominated. They were not prey. They were a force the galaxy had misunderstood at its peril. My testimony was meticulous. I detailed the menagerie incursions, the failures of our war beasts, the speed at which humans adapted, and the astonishing precision with which they integrated both predators and environment into coordinated defense. I showed how they endured loss without collapsing, how they repaired their world without surrendering vigilance. Every action was deliberate, every choice honed for survival. Some counselors leaned back, their exoskeletons creaking in discomfort. Some denied it outright, labeling anomalies as statistical noise, assigning human resilience to luck or miscalculation on our part. Prey is not adaptive in this manner, one objected, voice echoing across the chamber. Others listened quietly, their optics narrowing, processing the unprecedented reality before them. Humanity had changed the calculus of interstellar interaction, not through conquest, but through endurance, strategy, and choice. A debate followed, tense and drawn out. Some argued for continued observation, some for containment, and others, fewer than I expected, for immediate recognition of Earth as a boundary species. In the end, the precedent was set. Earth would no longer be classified as a vulnerable planet for experimentation or conquest. It was a boundary, a line drawn in space and in doctrine, beyond which no empire would cross without reckoning. Orders went out, fleets were rerouted, observation posts shifted focus, protocols that had assumed Earth's subservience were rewritten entirely, and for the first time in galactic history, humanity was respected, not as a threat to be destroyed, but as a species whose presence demanded acknowledgement. I left the chamber with the quiet satisfaction of a witness to history. Somewhere deep within the ascendancy's neural lattice, I recorded it. A species had set a precedent, and the galaxy would never forget. I record this not as confession, but as warning. Across the stars, many still dismiss Earth. They mock its wildlife. They laugh at the fragility of its inhabitants. They measure strength by muscle, by claw, by armor, by firepower. They do not see what I have seen. Humans are not measured by their bones. They are measured by their choices, by their endurance, by their capacity to stand, undaunted, beside predators, plagues, natural disasters, and enemies who thought them weak. I have observed species crumble under pressure that humans accept without hesitation. I have seen armies falter where humans hold formation. I have recorded war beasts, machines of our own design, destroyed not through might, but by strategy, by patience, by an intimate understanding of life and death that transcends technology. They survived their world when it hunted them. They survived themselves when chaos ruled. They rebuilt after annihilation, not for glory, but for continuity. They learned, adapted, and chose to endure without surrendering empathy. Mock them if you will, doubt them, underestimate them. The galaxy did, and it was forced to retreat. But remember this. Remember what I have witnessed. Humans are not merely survivors. They are teachers of survival. They are the species that stand beside their world instead of above it. They measure threat not only in strength, but in memory, in patience, in understanding. And if the galaxy ever forgets, humanity will remind it. Final transition. The stars are full of warnings written in silence. Earth is one of them. And its message is simple. Underestimate humans at your peril.